Hello, gamers. Alright, I'm going to do it. I'm going to restore my favorite N64 controller. All the rest of them were just practice. You can tell it was my favorite, because I got stickers all over it. And hockey tape. Man, it was a pretty different time back then. You know, personalization was a part of everything. You know, if it didn't have Sharpie marker on it, it wasn't yours. If it didn't have hockey tape on it, then, you know, the grip was going to slip out of your hand and, you know, kill the neighbor. I mean, those things did get pretty slippery. Man, it was a really weird time in gaming. It was the budding, the start of all games, right? I mean, we're not talking about the Pong days, but when I was growing up, it was the 80s, so it was a time before the gaming world was so rigid and formulaic. The time before updates and patch notes and public shaming of creators and all that jazz. The games and user experience has changed a lot. I grew up for the most part in a small town, and home computers weren't very common in the 80s, but my mom had one for college, so some of my first memories are playing adventure games with her on it. My first open world game was probably that Mother Goose game, I think, for the Apple, but the one I remember is King's Quest. It was completely magic to me. I mean, I'd seen movies, you know, and I'd heard stories, you know, she read me books, but I never had a chance to, like, be a part of the story, to make decisions for the character that visually changed in front of me. I mean, I was only like 6, but it was completely magic to me. I mean, heck, I learned to read partly from games like Black Cauldron and King's Quest. The artwork was captivating, mysterious. You know, it wasn't spelled out because you couldn't get close and check out a microcosm of what you're, you know, trying to find. And there were areas you just plain couldn't see and had to navigate through, because even though it was, you know, a 3-dimensional layout in a game, it was often just 2 dimensions. Parallax mapping, or whatever they call it. It felt more like art. I mean, don't get me wrong, games today are like super artistic and they're amazing, but whenever a game was finished and shipped back then, it was done. You know, that was the product. That's what you got. The Nintendo 64 was one of the last bastions of a console of, you know, of dedicated games, really popular in the mainstream, especially, that was like this. That wouldn't be connected to the internet and wouldn't change. If you got really good at a PvP character, you know, a couch PvP character, you didn't have to worry about a patch changing them. You didn't have to worry about, you know, differences and weird stuff coming out politically about people that were involved in the game or something like that. You didn't care about Final Fantasy looking like blocky because you were just amazed that they could fit such a huge world on merely 250 discs. And if you think that's bad, King's Quest, I think, was like 10 floppy diskettes, and those things were 1.4 megabytes or something, so yeah, it's crazy. But there was like 10 of those games. Adventure and open world games have been a part of my world since my earliest memory. Me in the past few generations, maybe 1 or 2 before me, and definitely all the ones since, are kind of unique in the sense that we have a lot of our life memories in a digital world, in a shared digital world today. And back then it was almost more like reading a book, but I have a lot of fond memories of the video game experiences, virtual experiences that didn't take place in reality. And Nintendo did such a great job of bringing that kind of physicality to the gaming experience with their, you know, cutting edge, innovative controllers and new styles of presenting games and such. And they're continuing that tradition, and gaming today is awesome. I mean, we're in a renaissance, but there's a huge difference. It doesn't feel like you own them anymore. It doesn't feel like yours. It feels like you're renting it and renting the right to play it. Even on the games that are solo that, you know, you fall in love with, they're going to change. You know, you come back in a year, there's going to be a patch or an update. When you go to download it again, it's going to be actually different. In a lot of the ways, this is for the better. But, you know, there's some lost in that experience. Part of the escape. Part of the personal responsibility to project your imagination is lost too. The hyper-realism and, you know, constant effort to be very detailed in games, which, again, I love it. It's amazing, but it also takes away a lot of the user's active experience. I mean, I say active, I guess it's kind of subconscious, but you're much more passive when you just accept things. When you're curious about them, you get much more involved. Your mind, you know, gets a lot more immersed. I think that the loss of mystery with the advent of detail can be a balancing act on how you want to experience a narrative. The Nintendo 64 and PlayStation were two of the last consoles to come out with this type of model of game release that felt more like literature than, you know, communal meta experience. And going forward, the online digital experience is just going to get even more connected and even more updated and even more, you know, homogenous in, or hegemonous. I think I mean hegemonous. Anyway. If you experienced these consoles growing up, especially in your formative years, then when you go back and revisit the experience, the physical experience of the original hardware, something else is there that makes it, you know, even cooler. Now, so that's why a lot of the people my age, you know, want to go back and revisit the games that they were playing on the original hardware and stuff, and that's why so much of it has become hyper expensive these days. But that being said, I mean, I got a N64 controller USB version, a mock-up. It was like a, you know, third-party controller, so that I could plug it into my computer and play emulators on that, and it was an amazing experience. To go from, you know, playing an emulated version of Mario Kart on a non-Nintendo controller or a non-Nintendo 64 controller, and then to go to playing that directly within the same day, I can tell you there's just a difference. There's something about it. I was playing like 100 times better. My muscle memory kicked in, and, you know, it's like picking up a basketball after 10 years. You know, it's still there. You got to break through the cracks, but it's still there. And so I think that's why so many of us are drawn to the retro gaming world. The best part about retro games is that even if you did grow up with the original consoles, it's still a heck of a lot of fun to play all those old games in new ways, like handhelds and, you know, emulators on the computer and all that stuff. I recently got an Anbernic 351M, and I installed, you know, Parasite Eve on it because I actually have a copy of that game and I love it. It's one of my all-time favorite games. I didn't know how it would hold up over the years, but oh man, the pre-rendered scenery, the music score, the cinematics, even for their time, you know, 20 years, 25 years almost ago, were just amazing and very, very replayable. And it was a lot of fun to just, you know, be able to walk around the house playing it on a handheld instead of, you know, being fixed in the living room. See, but back then they also knew that you'd be playing in a specific place. So that was kind of a part of it. They knew that the lighting in the room would often be affected by what was happening on the screen. So games like Silent Hill and Parasite Eve and Resident Evil and, you know, horror games at that time utilized that. And if you and your friends, if you were gonna, you know, iron mode it, you were gonna play it in the dark, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. It's one thing that Nintendo always does right, is that their consoles always feel like toys. I think that was the real purpose. You know, a lot of the thumbstick in the Nintendo 64. You know, there was probably better ways to do it. The technology was out, I'm pretty sure, for, you know, rheostat attenuation or whatever. But they wanted to feel like a toy. So that plastic rattling, that inexpensively, you know, replaceable feel of it, that was intentional, which is, you know, a brilliant design idea in my opinion. But that's why their identity is, you know, completely unique in the market. There's plenty of copycats out there, but if you know, it comes to, you know, mainstream original production, Nintendo's just miles ahead of the competition when it comes to breaking the mold and changing things. You know what's also weird about it? Is that I'll always remember the games in better graphics, almost modern level graphics, than they actually were. If it's been long enough before I've played a game, when I go back and revisit that game, I am often surprised by how low the resolution is and how different it looks. Something about my mind updates those memories as they are a bit more malleable, as they were a digital experience. And I think that's one of the benefits of Nintendo's sort of, high color, toy-like charm, even in the in-game design, is that it goes for a lot longer without needing any sort of massive overhaul of the graphics. I mean, look at Final Fantasy, the original versus Final Fantasies today, even within the last 10 years. They're unrecognizable by comparison. But with Mario, you could pick up Mario 64 and compare it to some of the Mario worlds that came out later, and there'd be a lot of crossover and similarity. And I'm a PC master racer, don't get me wrong, but I think consoles are an exceptionally important corner of gaming. I mean, back when consoles were pretty much the only way to game, they were capable of bridging gaps between a lot of different things. I mean, you may not have wanted to play the Sorry board game with your dad, but if he was into Mario Kart, you guys could have some fun, and a lot of other games like that. I mean, the culture that was developed around enjoying a game on your couch was pretty awesome. Magazines would put out guides and stuff that you had to wait for, so there was a lot of mystery. You couldn't just pop out your phone and look how to beat a boss and do it. I mean, there was definitely ways to get that information, but there was an adventure between you and getting it. You either had to go get it from a friend or find some, library that had it, or a magazine place that had it. And for me, especially where I lived, that was really hard. Hell, my grandma even had one of the original Game Boys. She played Tetris on it. But she also had like Metroid, and me and my brother played that a lot on it. And Kirby too, I think. But you see, when I look back on that experience, because it's been so long since I've held one and so long since I've actually played an original, I'm remembering color, I'm remembering the characters as they looked on the box art, I'm remembering the experience being seamless and fluid. And when I go back and play those games now, it's definitely a shock, because my brain does this thing where, I kind of modernize it and update the experience. Or more to the point, I was imagining it a lot more than I realized. I was extending the virtual experience with my projected imagination to fill in the blanks a lot more than I realized. And it's something that I think is lacking a little bit in modern development. With finalized products that they had to release in carts and CDs, the bumps and difficulty curves and maybe imbalanced features of the game became a sort of a topography that was unchanging. No patch was coming out to fix it, so you and your friends just had to figure ways around it. If there was rooms that were inaccessible because the devs weren't able to finish the area, you and your friends had to figure out some way to do it. And you could get game sharks and stuff like that would give you access to stuff you wouldn't normally have. Of course, all that still existed, but the mystery of unfolding things, it was really crazy. And because it wasn't as much interconnectivity, it wasn't as easy for people to find all of the Easter eggs and stuff. So it meant that you could be the first to find something. It wasn't very likely. There were still millions of these things being sold when I was buying them, but it was possible. I'm going to admit that I was one of the people that was really looking for the Triforce in the Ocarina of Time. If you're not aware about this, you can look it up. There was a rumor that it was in the game. You could obtain it in all the other previous Zelda games, but there was no physical Triforce to obtain in the Ocarina of Time. I mean, I'm not sure if it just didn't make it in the final cut, like some rumors say, or if it was never intended to be there because the way they were telling the story was different. But I bought gold copies of the game. I bought walkthroughs. There was even a magazine article I remember that featured rumored ways of accomplishing it and getting the physical Triforce. I never found it. And as an adult, I know that there are coders that have gone through the files, like gone through the, the game code itself, broken it down and assets and everything, and it's not in the game. Like, it was never in the game. So am I upset that I spent, I don't know, probably 200-300 of my formative hours of my formative years, searching for this thing that was never in the game? No, absolutely I'm not. I'm not any more upset about that than I would have been, if my 10-year-old self had been told that my 6-year-old self, spent hours looking for a snipe on a snipe hunt, in Boy Scouts. I mean, it's just an adventure. It's Santa Claus. It's the Tooth Fairy. The Ocarina of Time, though, I gotta admit, I downloaded the 3DS version of it when it came out, which, by the way, if you have digital copies of games on the 3DS store, I'm sure you probably already know, as of the time this video is being made, you may have maybe a month before the digital shop is no longer available. So get there, get your stuff downloaded, or prepare to start backing up stuff and going another route with getting those games. But back on the Ocarina of Time, though, the remake was amazing. Even the 3D features were really good. Same thing with Majora's Mask. I have to say, I think I actually enjoyed the experience on the 3DS more than the original game, which I played a lot. So, innovation in gaming is still great, and all the things that are coming out that make it so that we can, relive and share these retro experiences are amazing. And I'm looking forward to the future of how these things go down. Right now I'm just restoring my old stuff, so I got a few more consoles to go through. PlayStation and Xbox 360, an original Nintendo system. And I've been looking around trying to find something, around pawn shops and stuff in my area that maybe needs, restoration or renewal or whatever. And I just unfortunately haven't been able to. It's pretty high demand out there. The value of this stuff keeps going up. That controller that I just restored there, I saw it on eBay for $130. I'm like, what? And that was renewed, like the one I just did. Now, I'm never getting rid of this one. Don't you even look at it. But that's awesome that the value of plastic has such a, is so high on the market because of the nostalgia value of it and how, or rather, the role that it played in forming gaming as we see it today. Anyway, I hope that generations going forward have some sort of similar experience, something with their friends that they can look back on fondly, some sort of memory that is, based in the digital time. Just something. If the gaming experience of today drives any sort of communal sense, then, that's good. Then I think it diminishes a lot of what video games and that type of literature can accomplish. I mean, gaming as a cultural thing is extremely unique in how it motivates people. It's a lot of people getting together and wanting to be a part of a world and change it and affect it and develop it even together with mods and, all kinds of cool stuff. Think about all the player-generated content that exists out there that they weren't paid to create and they had no stake in the success of. It was created entirely based on intrinsic motivations. And the best things out there always come from intrinsically motivated activities. It's different than when you're on a deadline and you're getting paid. If you can't sleep because you just have to finish creating a thing, it's going to be such a much more amazing and passionate thing than if you can't sleep because your deadline's coming up. I mean, games are like books and movies in the sense that they can bridge cultures and life experiences between people that would not ordinarily have anything in common. I mean, there's like millions of people out there that don't even speak the same language as me and have a completely different worldview, but we've got a shared experience in video games. Anyway, I'm going to keep going through my systems one by one until I run out of stuff to restore. And I really appreciate you guys watching. If you didn't know, now you know.